Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostic alongside Scarlett Fu. We're counting it down to the closing bell, and here they'll take us beyond the bell. It's a global simulcast with our friends Carol Masser and Tim Stenovic. Welcome to our audiences across our Bloomberg platforms here. A look at the broader market right now with an eye, of course, on the bond market, which is closed. Equity market's still open, Carol Masser, and they're green pretty much across the screen.
Yeah, pretty remarkable. And if you dig into the major industry groups, I know we'll talk about it, but you are seeing, certainly some buying here on this day when we're thinking a lot about what's going on in Israel. Having said that, and we talked about this earlier, right, Tim? I mean, some groups, whether it's defense or airlines are down almost 4%, as you see. Certainly the U.S. majors and other carriers, certainly around the globe, but are canceling flights into Tel Aviv airport.
It was pretty surprising to see the turnaround today that we saw in U.S. equities, but I think, Scarlett, it's fair to say that, instead of taking cues from the conflict right now in Israel, the stock market is taking cues instead from Fed speakers who said, maybe it's time for us to take a step back and pause and see what happens with high rates.
Yeah, dovish Fed speak kind of saves the day for equities, but if we're going to take a step back and see what happens, it might just be oil staying higher for longer and perhaps that bleeding into all the other inflation measures that the Fed does track.
Yeah, and of course, we get a lot of inflation data, of course, this week, including the CPI numbers. And more importantly, we get a start to an earnings season, maybe not with the banks, but certainly when you get to the other names, you'll find out just how much inflation is biting and just how much they've been able to push back on it by passing on some of those things to consumers. Let's walk through the numbers here as we get the closing bells here on this Monday afternoon, a day that started with most of the major indices deep into the red, turning into a day where most of the major indices solidly in the green. A Dow Jones Industrial Average up of roughly 190 points, or about 0.6%. An S&P 500 up almost 30 points, or about 0.6%. The Nasdaq Composite higher by more than 50 points, or about 0.4%, while the Russell 2000 putting in a pretty decent showing today, a 0.6% gain here for the small cap index.
All right, we're going to get into the major industry groups in just a moment, but looking at the S&P 500, most of the names in the index, 351 to be exact, higher for the Monday trade, 147 to the downside, and Scarlett, we've got about 5 unchanged here.
Yeah, let's take a look at the sector performances as well. If you split the S&P 500 up into 24 industry groups, energy stocks leading the way, up 3.5%, with all members, all 23 big cap energy names in the green. Capital goods, Romaine mentioned defense companies. Those are the defense companies that's pushing up that sub-index. And telecom services up by 1.7%. On the flip side, the decliners include household and personal products, or traditional defensive groups, and chip makers off by 0.4%. But these are fairly small losses in contrast to the gains among the best performers.
All right, guys, let's get to some of the individual gainers for the Monday trade. And certainly this has to do, I kind of did a split here. These are certainly names that are moving on that attack into Israel. And we talked about it earlier, and we've been talking about it throughout the day. Of course, the energy names, they are certainly outperforming on concerns about maybe longer-term supply issues. ExxonMobil up 3.4% today's session. On the other side, you've got the defense names. They are certainly gaining in today's session. Again, concerns about could we have a longer conflict in the Middle East or a broader conflict? And what does that mean potentially for increases in defense spending? So you've got something like Lockheed Martin. That name is up, about 9% here as we speak here at the close. Then I wanted to go to 2 names that are kind of beyond the conflict, if you will, and Disney among them. I know you guys were talking about it on TV. First reported in the Wall Street Journal, Nelson Peltz, seeking several board seats at Disney. He boosted his stake in the company. He now has more than 30 million shares, according to those people who are familiar. It's worth about $2.5 billion, so it would make him one of Disney's biggest investors. So that's going on. So Disney up about 2% in today's trade. And Weight Watchers, interesting over the last month or so. Weight Watchers, of course, now known as WW International, rallying. This one is up.
This was called because Oprah spoke out of turn or something.
Yeah, apparently back on September 20th. She's a shareholder, as you know. She's a board member. And she said at a panel discussion that she refused to take one of these GLP-1 weight loss drugs. So you're talking about Ozempic and Wegovy, and saying that this would be the easy way out. Well, the stock tanked on that because, as you know, WW, this is a big part of their strategy, these weight loss drugs going forward. Well, apparently she clarified what she said, and she said, just clarified it, and I guess kind of calming everyone down anyway. WW shares up about 13% today.
I didn't know all that about what Oprah had said recently. So that is an
But
interesting.
Oprah says,
You got to keep up.
listen.
You don't have your alerts on your phone.
I don't.
When
I
Oprah-
don't. I don't. I mean, she's been a
it's
shareholder in that
Powell,
company for
Jefferson,
years.
Mary
but-
Daly, Oprah.
Morgan
exactly.
Stanley also had some upbeat
Fed
comments,
speakers,
I should say.
yeah,
too.
the Fed speakers and Oprah certainly. Hey, I got the decliners today. I want to start with the worst performer on a points basis in
Tim
the
doesn't
S&P
read
500.
People magazine. That's what I'm thinking.
Nvidia,
Go
that company finished the day down by just 1.08%. Semiconductor stocks, though, from Nvidia to Applied Materials, they did fall today over concerns about the possible impact on Intel's plan to build a new manufacturing plant in Israel. Earlier, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had placed the deal's value at $25 billion. This plant by Intel and other chip companies as part of a diversification of their production sources. And then the airlines, United Airlines Holdings, all airline stocks, all big airline stocks, I should say, slid on Monday after some companies halted flights to Israel. And of course, oil prices moved higher as well. Delta, United, American shares all fell. United had flights to Tel Aviv from Washington, Newark, Chicago, San Francisco. The head of American Airlines Pilots Unit said that members shouldn't fly to Israel until the situation is safe. Shares of airlines moving lower on the day as well. Royal Caribbean Cruises. This is an energy story, but it's also a story about a couple downgrades or price target cuts, I should say. Royal Caribbean moved lower after the company got a couple of price target cuts from Wall Street analysts over higher fuel cost estimates. Barclays and Wells Fargo both cut their price targets on the company's stock.
All right, let's check in on what's happening in the Treasury space. It is the Columbus Day / Italian American Heritage Day here in the U.S., and of course that meant bond markets were closed, though we should point out that some of the main ETFs that take in, that actually invest in bonds, those were actually trading. In fact, TLT, the main ETF tracking the long bond, actually had its best day going back to late August here. And it gets to this idea, guys, of some of the comments that we have heard out of the Fed members, whether it was Mary Daly last week or Philip Jefferson today, this idea here that the markets have done a lot of the heavy lifting for the Fed when it comes to tightening financial conditions.
So that's it? We're done?
Maybe.
We're done with rate hikes?
Mission accomplished.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it does speak to the point of a lot of people thinking that perhaps 10-year yields have peaked. Barry Bannister of Stifel was just on saying just that. And a lot of people pointing out that volume in TLT last week reached the high since March of 2020. So that idea that people have been pulling out or piling in, we have reached that moment and now it's the aftermath. Of course, there's a lot of issuance coming out this week too.
No, that's a really good point. And I guess I would argue that, man, I feel like we've had this conversation, oh, rates are peaking. And then we kind of got fooled again. And I am curious in terms of the inflation prints this week, if they come in hot or start to stoke inflation concerns about it just continuing to be sticky, do we kind of have another rethink about what the Fed might do? What?
Well, I was
Go ahead,
going to
Romain.
say real quick, though, I mean, but I think Barry's point, though, too, and a lot of people have made this point, is you have to look at the differential with where the inflation rate is, depending on which one you want to pick here. And, I mean, we're basically above that when it comes to the Fed funds rate, Treasury rates, and where that inflation rate is. So, in theory, I mean, if you just do basic economic theory, then that would mean the Fed should actually stop.
Okay, but at the same time, we're getting blowout job numbers like we got on Friday, and analysts who are surveyed by Bloomberg, economists surveyed by Bloomberg, think that CPI year over year is going to be 3.6% on Thursday. So we're still well above where the Fed thinks that things should be.
And oil prices are elevated and may stay elevated for a while now, given the events of this past weekend.
Yeah, it's a tricky call, I will say. But I mean, if the Fed is even a little bit nervous about inflation not really under control, right?
Yeah.
Do we assume that they're going to raise rates again? Like, I just wonder what the think is. Are they worried about overdoing it or underdoing it at this point?
I love when you sit back and you do that little head thing, because that's when I know she's really trying to say something important here. For our radio audience, have no idea what I'm talking about here. But in all seriousness, though, but this goes back to the idea. I mean, if the market is doing a lot of the work, and they have, and in fact, you've had economists even argue that a lot of the disinflationary trend we've seen is actually more from the supply side, meaning things that were outside the purview of rate hikes to begin with, that maybe Philip Jefferson, maybe Raphael Bostic, some of the comments they've made, they're right, that this is more of a wait and see rather than, let's go into this meeting at the end of the month and think about whether we should hike or cut.
Well,
Maybe just do nothing. How about not have a meeting?
Well, then what are we going to talk about?
I don't know. We could talk about something else, something bright,
Well,
something fun.
the wait and see
That would
though
be
doesn't
nice.
necessarily mean
go back to Barbie
a
movie?
reminder. It doesn't mean cutting rates. I mean, higher for longer is what we've been talking about. So just because the Fed may not raise rates another time this year doesn't mean we're not going to be in a high interest rate environment for a significant period of time.
I also do wonder if the Fed's saying, we got 2 meetings, guys. If we want to take a pause again,
Yeah.
why not? And then we've got December, and then we can kind of see what the
And
new year
the Fed
brings.
isn't beholden to those meetings. I know we make such a big deal about these hard
That's a good
dates.
point.
but-
It does feel like they
but
are.
the Fed,
Isn't
the
that
Fed, could,
amazing?
the Fed could do whatever they want any day of the week, and they have in the past. I mean, obviously, maybe this situation doesn't rise to that emergency level, but it's not like they're somehow beholden, like, oh my God.
But they
we got 3
don't
more
do that
weeks before
anymore.
we make a
Remember,
decision.
like I think about that. They used to be able to surprise the markets. And when's the last time they did that?
They did a
they
surprise
wanted-
rate
they
cut
wanted
during
late
the
down.
pandemic.
Well, they did it during the pandemic,
Yeah,
so it
rate
wasn't that
cut.
long ago.
Yeah.
So extreme circumstances can do that. And Carol, you have to stay in the shot here. You're confusing me. But yeah, they can do it. And so if they feel like somehow they're behind the 8 ball, then they can always say, okay, you know what, we
But
made
a
a mistake.
surprise move would shock the market.
Probably.
Right?
Probably.
So if they really need to do that, then maybe they'll do it. All right, guys, we got to run. Obviously, a lot to talk about this week. We're going to be on all of it, the markets, and of course, what's going on overseas in Israel. So stay with us, everybody. As always, our cross-platform on radio, TV, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. We will see you, the whole team, tomorrow.